SUVs are very popular, but if you just want to fit loads of stuff in the back of a car, then an estate is probably your best option. This is the new VW Passat, and it is absolutely massive. Using the What Car suitcase test, we managed to fit 11 suitcases in the boot of the VW Passat below the parcel shelf, with the boot still able to close. Now, for some general car context on what that means, we managed to fit 5 of these exact suitcases in the back of a small car like a Suzuki Swift, and in a big practical SUV like a VW Tiguan, we could fit 9 suitcases. So this VW Passat is clearly one of the best boots around. Now let's get rid of these suitcases to take a closer look at what makes this boot so fantastic, because it's not just about the sheer capacity. It's got a load of helpful, practical things in here as well, like these hooks either side at the front so you can hang your shopping bags off it. You've also got a lever to pull down the rear seats, and it's useful having them back here because it means you don't have to go around to the rear door and yank the seats down yourself. You can do it from the boot as you then load things in. Now, the rear seats split fold 60-40, so ultimately not as practical as 40-20-40. They only go down in 2 chunks rather than 3, but still you do get a ski hatch, which means if you've got something very, very long which you want to put through the boot and still have 2 passengers sat either side, you can do that in the Passat. Up here, you've also got a 12-volt socket, and then down here, you've got a massive cubby on this side. You can also remove this if you want to make it easier to access it, or put it back in if you want to keep it more closed off. And on the other side, you've got another storage compartment with this strap as well. Now, as you can see, there is a bit of a loading lip at the front here, but this is a height adjustable boot floor. So this is in its lowest position, and if you want, you can prop this boot floor up using this handy cord there. Again, very useful, practical thing to have in this boot, to free up both hands to throw stuff into the underfloor storage area. You can see there isn't loads of it because we've got this upgraded sound system in the Passat, but there's still room for a couple of small bags. And then it is very simple putting the boot floor in its highest position. And when it's there, you can see there's basically no loading lip at all. So it means you don't have to lift heavy things over the loading lip and then put them back down, or lift them up over to get them out either. There's no such problems with the Passat. So, are you getting the idea? This is an incredibly practical car, and the numbers obviously back that up, as you would imagine. This has 690 litres of storage, so compare that to a Peugeot 508 SW, that has 530 litres, a Toyota Corolla Touring Sports, that's got 596 litres, and what about a BMW 5 Series Touring and a Mercedes E-Class Estate? Well, this is comfortably bigger than both of them as well. The only bad thing to point out really is that if you go for a plug-in hybrid, then overall boot capacity drops quite a bit down to 510 litres. But still, that is massive. And if you go for this regular petrol version, then this is one of the best boots around. It's also fantastic in the back here as well. Now, the new Passat is bigger than the old one. This is the 9th generation of the car, and it's only available as an estate. So it's not actually called the VW Passat Estate, as it used to be. It's just VW Passat, because there's no choice of body styles now, whereas previously you could get a saloon. And really, it's in these rear seats where you can notice that this is definitely bigger than the old car. There's limo-like amounts of legroom, loads of space for your feet under the seat in front of you as well, and it's very, very easy for an adult to stretch out and relax back here. Headroom is also pretty good, although with this sunroof added, it takes quite a lot of headroom away. So if you're 6 foot or over, you might just feel a little shortchanged on the amount of headroom available, but without the sunroof, then it's really not a problem at all. If you're sitting 3 adults side by side, then whoever's in this middle seat will be sat a little bit higher than the outer 2 because it pushes you up more, and that also reduces the headroom a bit as well. You've also got this transmission tunnel which comes up quite high, so you've got to put your feet either side of that. But overall, this is still a very, very, very spacious area in the back of the Passat here. You've also got this armrest you can fold down, and we showed you earlier, this is a ski hatch which can give you easy access to stuff in the boot. And if you fold this out, then you can see you've got 2 cup holders and something you can rest your smartphone on to maybe watch YouTube on a journey. So for boot space, rear seat space, the Passat is clearly very far ahead of pretty much all of its rivals. However, there is one car that it can't beat, and that is the Skoda Superb Estate, which is just as practical as this car. And the reason for that is the Passat and the Superb are very closely related. So they share the same suspension, the same gearboxes, the engine lineups are virtually identical. And in terms of dimensions, they're also pretty much the same. They aren't identical inside, but you can see there are some similarities, particularly when it comes to the layout. And really, in the Passat up front, this is a pretty comfortable place to be. You even get electric adjustment as standard. You get massaging seats as standard. Now, how rare is that, to have massaging seats as standard, even on the cheapest version of a car? That is a very welcome addition to the equipment list in this car. You also, as standard, get a massive infotainment screen. Not quite so big as this. The entry-level system is a 12.9-inch touchscreen. This is the optional 15-inch screen, which also gives you a head-up display as well. And it's okay. It's not as bad at all as the previous very glitchy VW infotainment systems that we've seen. And you can tell that VW is trying to improve things and is listening to feedback because, for example, you've still got these sliders for the climate controls. They are still rubbish and not as good as physical controls, but at least now they are backlit so you can see them at night. Previously, in VWs with this infotainment system, you just couldn't see what was happening down here if it was dark. And similarly, other VWs have some kind of cheap feeling, squeaky, touch sensitive pad thing on the steering wheel, which is rubbish to use. This Passat, thankfully, has very nice, solid, physical buttons, which are very, very, very simple to operate. So that is good. And the infotainment system itself is okay. You get smartphone mirroring as standard, and that really is going to be the main way that you interact with this screen. And in terms of quality, in this top spec R-Line model, you've got a nice mix of materials. Even on trim levels lower down, it's still a good mix of materials in here that feel pretty dense, solid. These air vents are nicely damped. And it does generally have a pretty good feeling of quality in here. It's certainly not going to trouble a BMW 5 Series Touring or a Mercedes E-Class estate. But for the cheaper estate cars around, this certainly is pretty nice inside. And compared to a Superb estate, this arguably is a bit more consistent in its quality because in the Superb, it's a bit more obvious where the cheap feeling bits are than it is in the Passat. And this is also good for practicality. You've got a very well positioned, nicely cushioned armrest here, which you can open up to reveal a pretty big storage compartment with this very long, thin storage tray that you can get rid of if you want. And then on the center console, you've got this really neat design that nicely hides some more useful compartments and 2 cup holders. So all in all, lots to like up front in the Passat. The Passat has a relatively simple engine lineup with 3 choices for you. There's a regular 1.5 litre petrol, which is technically a mild hybrid, and there's also 2 plug-in hybrid versions for you. All of them are front-wheel drive, and there is no diesel in the lineup at all. But if you love what the Passat has to offer and you wish there was a diesel option, then the Skoda Superb Estate, which, if you remember, is very, very closely related to this car, does have a diesel in its lineup. We are in the entry-level 1.5 litre mild hybrid. So this is the 1.5 ETSI. And it can do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 9.2 seconds, which isn't amazingly quick, but it's certainly punchy enough for everyday driving. The plug-in hybrids are a lot more powerful and they're quicker, and they also get a 19.7 kilowatt hour battery, which gives them a massive official range of up to around 80 miles, which is incredibly far. That beats virtually all other plug-in hybrids around when it comes to official range. But it is still the case that plug-in hybrids can only really make financial sense for company car drivers because those plug-in hybrids are much more expensive to buy outright than this mild hybrid. So for most people, in terms of running costs, you might actually be better off sticking with the regular, cheaper petrol version instead. Whichever one you go for, you get a DSG automatic gearbox, and in the mild hybrid, it has 7 speeds. In the plug-in hybrid, it has 6. But to be honest, this is one of the weakest points of the Passat on the road. The shifts themselves are absolutely fine, but it can take an age to kick into action. So if you're waiting at a roundabout and you spot a gap, you want to go for it. Even if you floor it, the gearbox is really very, very slow to react and then actually help you move away. which can be frustrating. Sport mode makes things a little bit better, but you don't want to drive around everywhere in sport, do you? A real strength of the Passat is long distance comfort, but it does depend on which version you go for. Entry-level Passats come with a relatively firm suspension setup that can deliver a slightly choppy low-speed ride, although things do really settle down at a cruise at higher speeds. Top-spec R-Line models, like this, come with DCC Pro adaptive suspension as standard, and that delivers a really calm and polished ride. You can also get it as an option on the lower trim levels if you don't have an R-Line. Models with DCC Pro get a number of different drive modes, which you can trigger through the infotainment screen like this. And it even gives you an individual mode where you can customize the firmness of the suspension by up to 15 different increments. Now, obviously, this is quite a fiddly and distracting thing to do while you're driving, but in its softest setting, this makes very light work of speed bumps, and it still actually remains very smooth on the motorway as well. And it's great having this level of customization available in the drive mode setup of the car. You do, of course, still just have a regular comfort, sport, or eco preset to choose from as well to keep things simple. Even in sport mode though, this isn't exactly a hot estate car. So something like a BMW 3 Series Touring or a 5 Series Touring are way more engaging to drive, and they'll put a far bigger grin on your face on a twisty road than this Passat does. But it's still composed, competent, and certainly more agile than a regular SUV. The final thing to mention about the Passat on the road is that this is a great tow car. In fact, we named it our tow car of the year recently. And if you want to find out what makes it so good, then click on that link to watch our video roundup. If you want to buy a Passat, but you're not sure which engine or trim level to go for, we think the best engine in the lineup is the 1.5 litre ETSI. It's the entry-level choice, so it's the cheapest, but it's still a decent performer, and the plug-in hybrids really do push the price up quite a bit. As for the trim levels, this car is so well equipped as standard that we think sticking with life keeps things cheap and makes sense. Apart from metallic paint, the only other option that might stand out and be worth considering is DCC Pro adaptive suspension. We mentioned it earlier, and it does improve the ride for about £1,000. If, by the way, you don't really like slightly dark, drab interiors, then there is a brighter colour scheme available with the Passat, but it is a shame that it costs £1,200 to get it. By the way, don't get excited by this. This is not a Passat R like the performance-focused Golf R. Instead, this just means it's a Passat R line, which is a trim level. There are no performance upgrades whatsoever. There are cheaper estate cars out there. A Peugeot 508 SW, Vauxhall Astra Sports Tourer, both cost less ultimately than a Passat, but this is much bigger and much better than those cars. It's also still loads cheaper than premium alternatives like a 5 Series Touring or an E-Class Estate. Things get a bit trickier when you compare this with the Superb Estate, because that car is about £2,000 cheaper spec for spec than the Passat. But whichever car you end up with, you're getting a fantastically practical estate car, which is also great on long journeys as well. There's also a £4,000 saving on a Passat and a £3,000 saving on a Superb on whatcar.com right now. Thanks very much for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click up there, and do make sure you subscribe to our channel as well. And if you want £4,000 off a Passat, then click on that link to go to whatcar.com, where you can get that deal, and also read our written review of this car and all of its rivals.